Okay, I think we start.
Yes.
Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the third AQUACOSM-plus webinar. We are very happy to welcome today Erik Jeppesen, and he will be introduced in a minute. Before that, some general notes. First of all, if you are here for the first time in this webinar series, and if you're not familiar with the AQUACOSM project, this is an international EU Horizon 2020 infrastructure project. We provide transnational access to mesocosm facilities, and we organize a number of other interesting activities. So if you want to learn more about AQUACOSM-plus, please visit us on AQUACOSM EU. On our webpage, you will also find the webinars that have been recorded last week and the week before by Hans-Otto Pörtner and Andreas Oschlies. And a few technical notes about this webinar this afternoon. US participants cannot speak, but you can submit at the end of the talk, you can submit questions through the question and answer tool that you find on the bottom of your Zoom screen. We also want to make you aware that this webinar is being recorded. So if you cannot follow all the time, or if you want to recommend it to others, it will be later uploaded on our webpage. And this is now the webinar by Erik Jeppesen. It will take about 1 hour, including question answers. After the webinar, there will be a World Cafe for those who have signed up, and to join this World Cafe, please use the Zoom link that you received in a separate email. Thank you. And with this, I hand on to Miriam to introduce our speaker today.
Okay. Let me check whether I'm on. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Robert. And I'm very happy to introduce our friend Erik Jeppesen. As you all know, he is one of the world leading aquatic ecologists working in the inland waters, the lakes and the rivers, to understand the interaction with biological structure and the nutrient and climate change. He has kind of changed the way how we understand on shallow lake ecology, especially through the changing the ideas in the alternative stable states, the role of aquatic plants, paleolimnology, recovery from eutrophication, and lately a lot on the climate change. He is one of the true most inspiring initiator of shallow lake research all around the world, literally all around the world, because he worked in every continent except Antarctica. He's been currently actively working with 150 different research groups in every continent. He's especially amazing in the field work. I don't know, maybe some of you already been into the field work with him, because he's always inspiring and he's unstoppable. Even at the 40 degrees Celsius temperature, he's definitely after for the work, or in the cold Arctic, and he will do the work at top speed while at the same time observing the entire ecosystems and formulating hypotheses about it. My last words will be that Erik is now affiliated with us at Middle East Technical University Biology Department, and we have one funding from the National Funding Agency for studying the structuring and functioning of saline lakes, which is at the level of infancy. But this is not Erik's first saline lake project, of course. I introduced him as a freshwater ecologist, but he has been doing research in Tibet and Northwest China on saline lake as well. Now the floor is yours, Erik, and I will wish everybody a very pleasant and nice webinar.
Can you see it all now?
Great, thanks.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about salinization, which is a growing threat to our environment. And you can see a nice picture here from Lake Tuz, which is in Turkey, and I'll come back to some of these lakes later on. Michael Iglias have put this together in a recent review where you can see the different sources and different problems we are dealing with when we have salt water input to fresh waters. One is that you are simply excavating a different salt amount, and this will lead also to release to the freshwater systems. Agriculture is another factor that gives rise to increasing salinization, both directly because you are adding different things like potassium to the fields, and this can lead to a leaching to the freshwater systems, but also indirectly because of water abstraction. Road salt is another one, and wastewater urbanization. And all these things together put into freshwater means an increasing salinization of these systems. And you will have effect on the entire system, first of all, on the organism level, because they're depending on the right iron balance in the body. And you also have an effect on the ecosystem and the ecosystem services. You also see an effect on the economical cost together with the salinization and the effect on the human health. And on top of that, we have the global change also. And this will lead to increasing salinization, both because of increasing water demand and reduced runoff, increasing evaporation, and also sea level rise that can give more saline coastal lake systems. I'll show first a few examples of the effect of salinization of different kinds, and then I'll go back to the main topic. It's about dryland lakes, which I'm going to talk about mostly. You can see here an example from a paper put together by Dugan et al. About the changes in salinity in North American lake systems. And there are different type of lakes here, and then there's a time series you have here. And for most of the lakes, there have actually been an increase in salinity over the time, or conductivity in the time. Some lakes have shown a reduction, but generally most of them have shown an increase. And if you go into more detail in this study, you can see in different parts of the US how the chloride has increased. Each of these lines are a lake system, and you can follow the changes over time here. And they are also put together, so put all the data together here in this figure here, showing that just the 1% area that are concrete or impervious will have a big effect on the ecosystems in the salinity in the systems. And you can see it with the 1% here in the nearest 500 meters around the lake systems. Then you can see the red one are those that have shown an increasing salinity or chloride concentration over time. And you can see just with 1%, many of those are red, which means an increasing. Black means, purple means no change, and yellow means a decrease. So all those with, most of those with increasing are in areas with relatively a small area of effect, lead to a big effect. Here is another one of another type of pollution and salinization, and this is from mining, and this is from Michael's paper that comes later on. And you can see the potassium mining in Spain here has led to an increase in transport of suspended matter, and with this a lot of also salt elements. Another type of salinization you will see in near coastal areas because of the increasing sea level rise and more frequent storm, and especially this one will lead to a lot of input of salt to the systems. And if we take, for instance, our country, Denmark, then 1/3 of the total lake area in Denmark is actually brackish, and we can expect that more of those will be brackish in the future, when more lakes will be brackish in the future because of this sea level rise and the frequent storms. It's of course mainly in lowland areas, but for instance, if you take US Florida, will also clearly be affected by these sea level rise and storms. And in these systems, with the salinity increase, you can have a very small change in salinity can have a drastic effect on the ecosystem. So this is something we have to deal with in the future. I think that we have these kind of changes, and I'll show you just here an example where we pass a salinity where Daphnia cannot any longer stay there. And then you can see the ratio between the amount of algae per unit of phosphorus here is going from one level to a complete different level at all nutrient addition levels that you have here. You have 3 different nutrient levels, and you can see the same pattern for all of them, simply because you lose the Daphnia that else will graze down the algae. And this, of course, indicate that for each pollution, you can say, of phosphorus to the system, you get much more algae in the water if you are past this salinity threshold. And these thresholds we see a lot in saline system, which I'll come back to later also. And generally, we can expect that the inland saline ecosystem will become more in focus in the years to come, because we simply get much more land in drought over the time period, from around 25% to up to 50% that will be in drought in future. And this will, of course, lead to salinization. I'll not talk about all these different kind of salinization in more detail, because you can go to different kind of reviews, and there is a recent one here by my colleague Elias that is taking all these elements in, and it's a very nice review. And of course, he also referred to other reviews and include a lot of new and original literature. So go to this one and you'll learn a lot about salinization. I'll concentrate on the arid landscape, the Mediterranean landscape, and I'll especially focus on Turkey, but also talk a little bit about experiments we have done in China. This is from another review paper by Igor Sadarov, where you can see that he has been discussing the changes you have in biodiversity or in saline lakes in Europe and East Asia. Not go into detail with this, you can go to his review there. These Mediterranean arid systems are very, very sensitive to changes in both temperature and water balance, of course. And you can see here the temperature we can expect in the future. And unfortunately, we are running along the high one, that we get a very high increase in temperature over the coming period. And this will be leads to higher evaporation potential. And in these areas that are already dry, then it will be devastating for these systems. And this is a prediction for the changes in runoff in a different part of the world, simply because we now have a very different, we'll have very different precipitation pattern in a different part of the world in the future. And you can see this is an increase in precipitation, and here you'll have a decrease in precipitation. And consequences is that the runoff to the river systems is changing quite dramatically. Try 30 to 40% or more in this area compared to an increase in the north. So these areas will get much less water to the lake systems, and also, of course, the river system will be affected by this. And in these places, this increase in temperature is combined with a reduced precipitation, and this is, of course, a double sword effect you have dealing with. Moreover, we are also getting more and more people on the earth, and if we can expect this 50% increase at the same time as we have this global warming, and we are also feeding higher in the food web, and this means that we need a much more crop production to feed the cattle and whatever we eat animals. And this is very nicely shown in this graph here, what the consequence of that is for water. If you produce 1 kilo potato, you need 500 to 1500 kilo of water. But if you have beef, it's much, much higher, 40 to 45 times much more water you need for 1 kilo of beef compared to 1 kilo potato. And this is, of course, extremely bad for the systems, the water balance in the system. And if we talk about the Mediterranean or the semi-arid and arid landscape, we have even seen a very big change in farming practice. And typically in this area, you will have animal farming, that is goats or sheep or whatever, that goes around and eat what's there, and without any form of irrigation. And then you shift now to producing crops in many areas here. And this needs a lot of irrigation. And the irrigation is not coming, of course, from above. It's mainly coming from groundwater that you pump up to keep this production running. And the consequences of that is extremely clear in many places of the world. And I'll show some good examples from the Konya Basin, Turkey later on. But this is from farming in northwest China. And this is a river system here. You can see that this is the annual flow in the river, naturally going up and down depending on season. And this is from 1950 and to 2006. And now you can see here, after you start with this crop production, that you have a dramatic reduction in the amount of water in the river system. So this is using a lot of water, you have a lot of evaporation, and the consequences are what it is. And you can see this was northwest China. Now we go to the Konya Basin in Turkey, exactly the same, no difference. Same practice in different parts of the world. And I'll concentrate a lot of my talk on this Konya Basin because we have put together now a new paper, and it's almost finished and will be sent in for a special issue of in inland waters very soon. And we have some fresh graphs here I can show to illustrate the consequences we have of these changing farming. The Konya Basin is here. You can see this is in the middle of China, not in the middle of Turkey. And Konya Basin was back in time and in the glaciation, the last glaciation, it was a big boreal wetland. And you also have a big lake here called Lake Konya, Paleo Lake at that time. And now you have a saline lake systems up in the north, and Lake Tus is the big flamingo area in Europe. And you have the largest freshwater lake here in the upper part of the basin. So you have a shift here from more freshwater system and also a lot of dams to keep the water. And then you have the saline system in the north here. And in this system, you see exactly what we talked about before. Animal production, which is the gray one, is going down, 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 and a little bit increase in the end. But we have had a major reduction in animal production, and instead a very, very big increase in production of crops. And especially since the 2000, where there will be sort of privatization of sugar beet production and other activities that leads to an increase in production. Huge increase, and of course this means that you need more water for the production, and you can see this increasing in water use in the area. And especially you go from let's say less thirsty crops to very thirsty crops like maize and also sugar beet. Especially sugar beet is going up dramatically, and they need a lot of water, as you can see over here in this graph, how much you need a millimeter for the production. So this is a dramatic shift, not only in the amount of production, but also in the shift to more thirsty crops. And this is, of course, consequences for the water balance. And this is nicely shown, I think, in this figure here from different wells in the Konya Basin, where you can see the water level in the groundwater, and more or less 1 meter down per year. It goes from these 30 meters in this case now to 70 meters here. There are different patterns in different systems, but the main pattern is this one here, that you have a major reduction in the groundwater level, and you need to go deeper and deeper to pump up the water. And of course, pumping up water of this kind leads to salinization of the soil and also salinization of the water, where the water is running into in the lake systems here. And effect is also clear, and this is Miriam that put this together from different publications, and you can see this is the changes just in a 10 years period in different lake systems. The red one is how it was in the first period, and the other one is after 10 years period. So really big changes over a very short time period in the water, amount of water in the lake systems. And we have this Lake Tus, which is the saline one, the big saline one in the north. And maybe they have kissed there, these flamingos, which are so important in this area, and kissed for the last time, as I always say when I present this. Another one just outside this Konya basin is Lake Acheaer. It was once 350 square kilometer big, and you can see it here in 75, 87, shrinking a little bit, 2000, 2006 almost gone, and here you're gone completely. So this lake has disappeared completely. 350 square kilometer big lake. Another example is a very iconic lake called Lake Meka. It's a volcanic lake that also very touristic ones. People went there for seeing both the volcanic. There's a double volcanic because there was a lake inside this one, and then we have the other one. And this was the situation in 2020, and this was in 1997, 2007. So you can see really big changes. And if you go into more details using the Landsat images and the analysis of those done in this project also, you can see that this is the lake over time and becoming a little bit more saline because it gets white and finally disappears completely over time. And you can see how the area of the lake has changed here, and around 2003-4, then it goes down to, and now it's completely gone. And the salinity, of course, has increased. This is a salinity index that is more negative, more saline, and you can see that it has just increased and increased over time before it just disappeared completely. And this change, the big changes you have, is exactly where you start to have the crop production dramatically increasing in the system. So, and the water consumption increase also. So huge changes over a very short time period in this lake system here. The consequence for these changes of the loss of water is that you have a big effect on the ecosystems, and I'll just illustrate it here with the bird counts that have been very clear results from this bird counting. And you can see here that there was lost of 242 species in these different quadrats, and especially in here the biggest change have been, and this is where the big marshes were, and they have disappeared from the system. And you can again see where you lose many of the birds in the system. It's here 2000, after 2000, there have been big changes in the abundance of the birds. So it fits very well to the changes we've seen in water in the different lake systems, and of course also in the groundwater. And the future is not is a little bit grim for this area here, and because maybe we can expect also at least for a period that the production of crops will continue or even go up, but we have a change effect on the system. And Tuba Busak has been modeling all these systems here, both the catchment and the lake system, and have tried to calculate how it will go with this lake in the future due to the climates in the different climate scenarios. And she has been working with different climate scenarios here, the well-known one here. And of course, the worst one are the 8.5, and the 4.5 is much less. And naturally, this has had a big change in this water level depending on the climate conditions. It's a karst landscape, so it goes up and down very easily in the area, and it's a closed basin. And nowadays, it's around this 10-meter deep, this lake. But in the future, you can see that it will more or less disappear, at least for many years. It will go and be dry, completely dry in the future. In the worst scenarios, it will be already in 2030. In the least strong scenario, it will be later in the century. But you will have, even at the lowest one, you will have a big change here, unless you do something in the outlet or do other mitigation measures. But under the current conditions, then it will be a dramatic effect on this lake system. And this is the biggest freshwater lake in Turkey, so it's quite amazing effect. Turkey is of course not special. There are a lot of these kind of stories around the globe, and one of the more conspicuous one is Aral Sea. As you can see, the big changes here in Aral Sea. And it's only saved because now up here is a dam, so they try to save the northern part. This one is disappearing also now, so this will probably also go extinct at a certain time. And this is again a misuse of water because they have pumped water from this catchment to another catchment to change the river system to this Aral Sea, and of course also the climate change have affected it. But it's a mixture of many things. But land use is a very big factor. We can also see from this Wayne's paper in Nature Geoscience, he has been looking at some of the bigger saline lakes in the world, and tried to look at how the volume has changed over time period here in these lake systems. And generally you can see a dramatic decline in maximum volume of these lake systems, set to 100 in the beginning, and during this period until 2020, there have been 17 in this case here, has been a major reduction in many of these systems. So, and this is again, not so much because of climate change, it's more because of land use in the area that have led to less water running into them, and then the volume goes down. And this can be illustrated by the Great Lake, one of them, the Great Lake Salt Lake in Utah in US. And this is what it would have been if it was no extra abstraction in the area. And this is the effect of the water abstraction. It has lost 3.6 meters and 48% of the volume over this time period from 1840 and when people arrived until today. Not only do we lose water in the system, consequence of these changes is also that we get more salinization, of course, both because of the precipitation reduction related to climate, evapotranspiration, and especially this agriculture expansion in arid regions that we have seen in the last many years, and water abstraction, of course. And the effect of salinization is huge on the lake system. And I'll show you some examples here. This is from an expedition we have ourselves in the northwest China, up here, this area, and looking at lakes and with different salinities, and then try to see how salinity affect the system. And you can see this is the total number of taxa along a log salinity gradient here. And this is a major reduction, of course, with increasing salinity, has been seen many times before, but here it's very clear from this data set also. And the number of taxa put into different salinity categories, you can see this effect here also. And it is not only the total richness go down, it goes down for fish, and at a certain level, fish disappear completely around these 30 milligram per liter of salt. And macroinvertebrate reduction, crustacean richness reduction. And here is another example from Russia, from Siberia near the Mongolian border. And you can see it phytoplankton and zooplankton along this mineralization gradient here. And you can see again this dramatic reduction with increased salinity in these systems also. So this is a general phenomenon all over the world that we lose diversity. But not only are we losing diversity, we also lose functional activity, functional capacity, and this can be expressed here by functional diversity. And this is for zooplankton as an example from the study in northwest China, where you can see you have many functional diverse, at a high function diversity here at the lower salinity, and then you lose it and become much more dominated by a few of these functional groups in the higher saline lakes. So you also change functional diversity, functional capacity, and also the food web length and the trophic position of the groups is changing. This is the food web length in the system NR from the layman metrics, and you can see along this salinity gradient it's declining with increasing salinity. And the trophic position is also of this ecosystem is also going down with increasing salinity. So you also change the entire food web structure and trophic position of the system. Both richness, functional diversity, and food web structure will change. And this shows maybe a sort of linear response, but it was also a log scale. But we often see that a dramatic shift when you pass a specific threshold in this system. And this is put together from the Tibet work that was run by Lin in Jinling in China. And you can see first of all, you can see one situation here, and the second one here, and the third one here. Here you have the fish included, the tree trophic position, you have zooplankton and you have phytoplankton, but suddenly you lose the fish, and then you get a very big Daphnia. You have small ones here because the fish eat them, and then you get very big Daphnia. And this means that you can consume much more algae in the system because they're more efficient grazer than these ones are, and then they're held down. So this is often a period where you get even less algae in the water. And then you finally also lose the Daphnia, as we saw also in the brackish lakes. And in this case here in the inland saline lakes, we get Artemia, and they're also feeding on algae. And I'll show you the data, the actual data also. This is from Tibet, from the high altitude lake systems that are saline because of, and you can see here the actual data. This is lakes with predators, this is before the fish disappears. Then you can see with the increasing salinity, then the copper boats are affected very fast to go down to very small, low levels. Small cladoson can prevail and stay in high densities also because the copper boats goes down, and they are held, the big cladosons are held down by the fish. But when you lose the fish, then you get large cladosons, and then at a certain point, you also, the cladosons cannot tolerate the salinity anymore, and then you get, instead of these, the Artemia, the amphiboat, to dominate. So very small changes again in salinity can have drastic effect on the ecosystem structure and function. And the effect, if you cascading effect, is also very clear because this is situation without fish, and this is when fish are present. This means at low salinity, of course. And then you can see this is the zooplankton phytoplankton ratio and indicating of grazing pressure. If the zooplankton phytoplankton ratio is high, then the grazing on the algae is typically high, and vice versa. And you can see this shift when you lose the fish, that you get much higher grazing on the algae, and you get much less chlorophyll per unit of phosphorus. This means again pollution with phosphorus will have a less effect on the algae biomass if you have no fish present, and this means intermediate high salinities. So what we can expect is that change in salinity or hydrology is more important than temperature in inland waters in the future. So when we have a climate change, it's not so much the temperature as it is the other two. At least that it could be a hypothesis to work on in the near future. I put it together in this way that when you are in the freshwaters, then climate change will have the temperature effect will be very big on the ecosystems. And we have many examples of that around the globe. And when you then become brackish and a little bit more inland saline, and salinity goes up, then salinity is the key factor that changes things in the ecosystems more than it's the temperature itself. And you can see this dramatical shift in salinity, the shift in the ecosystem with the changing in salinity I showed before. But this is just an idea. There's a lot to do for all kinds of students in this field, and there's a good time for activities in this area. So as I said, that in some of the conclusions that we draw from this is that we'll have a reduction in species diversity, food chain length, and trophic position with increasing salinity. We will have threshold responses we can expect that. But all things also depend on the type of ion composition we are dealing with and ratios. And you can read much more about this in Michael's review. That is it's very important what type of salinity you are dealing with, if it's a chloride or it's a carbonate, and this is very different from the different systems. But the knowledge in this field is very much behind what we know from freshwater ecology studies. So there's a lot to do, as I said before. And just taking the start of your cafe for tomorrow, how can we then study the effect of changes in salinity? One way is, of course, to do lab experiments. We can go do very simple experiments with single stressor and single organisms, chloride and one Daphne, for instance. And we can go to multi-stress or multi-species experiments in the lab. You can study physiology, you can study behavior, and also microevolution, for instance, within the zooplankton community. But of course, if we want to be a little bit more sure about the real situation, we have to go into bigger scale, and mesocosms is one way forward. And you can do factual design here. You can have 2 salinities, 2 temperatures, and 2 Newton level. And you can have a gradient design where you have a salinity gradient and combine that with other stressors like temperature, or 2 temperatures, for instance, or 2 Newton levels. You can do short-term experiments and you can do long-term experiments. And here is an example from Denmark where we have been running it since 2003. So there's 17 years where we have had different temperatures and Newton levels. So, but often it's not possible to do these kind of experiments, but short-term experiments are possible. And then you get more realistic conditions with sediment and plants and whatever it's in there. You can also do mesocosm experiment along gradients. And here is an example from what we did in the Refresh project, looking at a latitude gradient, where you did exactly the same as set up in different countries along a climate gradient here. The good thing with this is, of course, that that you get the real natural conditions with precipitation and evaporation, and you get the right sunlight conditions for the region, so you can try to look at the consequences of these kind of changes in this system. There are also drawbacks from that, but we did the same experiments there in different with smaller, shallower and a little bit deeper enclosures, and because it was run in different places, you also got very different conditions in the systems. And this is, for instance, the water level in these systems here. You can see that in the warm areas in Greece and Turkey, the water level declined dramatically because the evaporation was much higher than the precipitation, while there's no really big change in the water level in the other areas in the northern part. And the effect of this was also very clear, that you get much more submerged macrophyte. This is plant volume, how much of the lake that are the mesocosms are filled up with plants. And you can see the warmer it was, the more plants you had in the system. So this water level decline had a big effect on the plant system, and then also on the rest of the ecosystems. You can do similar experiments with salinity along the gradients, for instance, in coastal lake systems. And an example of this coastal lake system analysis, here is an experiment. Now we are in the field. Now it's not mesocosm, but in the field that Sandra Bosé did some years ago together with students in Denmark and in Spain. And this is a study looking at the effect of plants on the ecosystem. And these were used artificial plant to get exactly the same conditions in different places. And they were hanged out in brackish lakes in Denmark, and similar in a number of brackish lakes in Spain. And then looking at the zooplankton fish and whatever is inside there. And you can see the setup here, in this case here, you put a net underneath so you could pick that up and get the fish inside. And a lot of work, but nice results, as you can see from this one here, where the density of a macroinvertebrate of different kinds in the 4 Danish systems, and here the 4 Spanish systems. And a clear difference, except for maybe for one example here. And the reason for this big difference was that there were 3 times more fish in the Spanish than you found in the Danish lakes. And we see that also in freshwater lakes, a very big difference in density of fish in the vegetation, inside and outside, in warm and cold systems. You can also use time series, and I showed this earlier by Dukan's study in North America, looking at the data you have collected in monitoring programs and try to see effects of salinity there. And you can do gradient studies that I showed before also for the West China studies. And here you can see some clear results also, as you saw the clear results from that. You can also look at remains in the sediment, so you can do paleoecological studies, and there are many different remains that can be used for this. And you can also have physical chemical variables and DNA and other stable isotopes and other things can be used there to try to describe how it was in the past when we had higher or lower salinity, so to try to understand that. And here is an example from the lake in Naivasha in Kenya, and here they looked at the diatoms, and using a surface calibration data set, they could try to calculate the conductivity back in time using diatoms, or also using chironomids in the sediment. So they used both for reconstructing, and this gives not exactly the same results, but clear peaks of higher conductivity in some periods where the lake water level also went down, as they can reconstruct that. As a good example of how to use these kind of paleoecological data to try to describe changes in ecosystem function and over time. You can also have catchment and lake stream ecological models, and we saw this example here from Lake Beysehier, where Tuba Busak looked at the effect on the future water table in Lake Beysehier. But there are many other studies of this kind around, and it's a good tool also. But if we look at these tools, then none of them are perfect. They have their pros and they have their cons. But if we combine them, they may provide us with the knowledge needed to recommend how to optimally mitigate the effect of salinization. So try to use many different approaches or combine data from different approaches to understand the effect on salinization. This is the way forward. And we have a project now, as Miriam said in the beginning, called Climb Salt Lakes, where we try to combine all these different methodologies in order to understand the changes in these Mediterranean arid semi-arid systems. And we are going to look at 60 lakes in the Turkey area, in Turkey, in the Konya Basin and Bordeaux areas. And you can see there are several saline lakes in these areas, and some are shrinking quite dramatically, as we talked about before. We're also going to work in Kazakhstan. There are some very nice systems there where you can see there are a lot of lakes on the Pearl. They originally came from this Lake Tengiz here, but they dried out, and then you have a lot of small lakes here. So they have very big diversity in salinity, as you can see with the color you have here from the satellite photos. But they are more or less the same age, so they are fantastic to work on, I'm sure, for looking at this. We should have had an expedition this year, but because of COVID, we had to change that to next year. We're also doing experiments in 2 different areas. We are setting up some advanced mesocosms, both in Ankara, which is in 1100 meters high, and then the coastal area here in Mersin. So we have a natural climate difference between these 2 areas. And then we'll run the same time of experiments in these areas when looking at salinity effects, combined with other stressors like temperature and nutrients. And in AQUACOSM-plus, also contribute to these experiments. And there are this transnational access where you have possibility to come and study in these places also, including our system here in Turkey. So there's a possibility to apply for money to come there. And you can read more about our project on this webpage, and you can read more about AQUACOSM-plus on this webpage. And with this, I'll say thank you for inviting me to give this talk.
Thank you very much, Erik, for this great talk, and especially for illustrating the problem from many different parts of the world. Yeah, it's of course very worrisome, and indeed we are interested, or we are initiating this discussion also to think about what we as researchers can do about it. I start forwarding some questions. One question by Miguel Canedo Arguelles is, what are the societal consequences of that you showed on the salinization of lakes in Turkey? So he's asking about the societal consequences in Turkey.
Yeah, no doubt that it will have a big effect in the future, because so you can say this agriculture cannot continue. If you lose 1 meter per year, then there is a limitation for how deep you can go, and then they have to give up this agriculture at a certain point. But at the moment, it's just taking the water, and you can see that the production went up. It's not going down at the moment; it's simply going up. But the future is grim, I think. Yes, the production cannot be run in these places in the future. Also because the soil becomes saline. It's not only because you have no water, the soil also becomes more saline. And this is, you can say, the corn belt of Turkey is Konya and this Anatolian basin. That's where you have the production. So the future is not looking good in this place. So I'm not from Turkey. Maybe Mary can add a little bit more to this because I'm foreign. I just look.
Miriam, you want to add to this?
I'm from a very wet area where it's raining more.
Unfortunately, not much is done on these saline systems, and also if you have like in between 2008 and 2004 and 2008, we had an extreme drought, and then it was like a big concern to the every level of governing, including the parliament. They even had a committees and everything to have to combat with it. Then the wet period came in. I mean, still we have heat waves and drought, but not to the extreme level that everybody forgot. You know, these politicians, they have a very short memory, like a fish memory. So not much really, but we want to, through this project also, we want to work with the outreach with the experts, you know, to reach as much as possible, of course. Yeah.
Thanks. I have myself a question related to this, because you illustrated the threshold when fish are dropping out and then larger macroinvertebrates are fueling. Maybe I'm not an insect ecologist, but are there mosquitoes that are benefiting from fish dropping out that the larvae can, so are there consequences on this side?
Maybe the salinity is too high for those. Not because else you'll of course find that if the fish dies for other reasons, then you'll get a lot of mosquitoes. But I don't think in these saline systems that you'll get it, because the salinity is too high for them.
Okay, let's
get this shift to amphipods at the highest salinity level, and this is economic value because it's used in many places. You can say for production and consumption. So it's this is an economical value for many places.
Yeah.
Okay. The next question is about if you could explain a bit more about the effects of increasing salinization on phytoplankton, especially the development of algal blooms.
Yeah, and this is something where I don't know much about at the moment, but hopefully we get more information later on. But with you can see, you saw this, that if you get a very big increase in salinity, like the high saline systems, then you actually get an intermediate saline, then you get the Daphne, and then you get grazing increasing. So then you get less algae.
Yeah,
but,
you actually illustrated.
The lower salinity in the brackish lakes I was showing in the beginning, then you get much more algae, and this was blue-green algae. So it depends on the salinity level, what kind of algae you get in the system, and it depends on the top-down effect, how strong it is. So there's not a single answer. And it's probably also depending on the type of salinities that I cannot tell much about, because you also get a lot of pH change. The carbonate is based on carbonate, the salinity. Then you get a dramatic increase in pH also at the same time. So you have often pH of 10 or something like that. And this should favorize blue-green algae also. I'm not, I'll say that it's too early in my career on saline lakes to go into too much detail, but I think it depends a lot on the salinity level and the type of salinity.
Yeah, and that actually addresses you're already addressing the next question. What is known about the impact of different salt ions? So when you talk about increased salinity, you especially talk about carbonates, or
inland it's often carbonate, but in some places sulfate also, and it's also chloride in some places. Of course, it's mostly the coastal lakes. So, but you have been working in soda lakes, so you can tell a little bit about that, Robert. You know more about that. You should give that. So, but this is a really big difference between the systems there. So what type of salinity you are dealing with?
We have better experts on soda lakes in the group, I think, than me.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay. I read the next question by Egor Saderev. It looks like salinization reduces the effect of nutrients on the ecosystem, at least water clarity. As with fish disappeared, the top-down control by zooplankton is stronger.
Yeah.
So salinization can be considered as the way to reduce negative effects of eutrophication on water quality. Of course, this is not about drinking water, but can you see a positive thing in it?
Yeah, but this is depending on how you see it, because it's clear you get, you get less algae in the intermediate salinity range.
Mm-hmm.
But how about biodiversity?
Yeah, but biodiversity goes down, so it depends on what you want to look at. I think because if the biodiversity goes down, the function of the system goes, it's also negatively affected. So, there's not no God here. I think it depends on the eyes watching. You also will, in some cases, you'll get more birds. Also, you can say the birds.
We have an interesting question by who? Sorry.
Yeah, the birds, many of the birds, you see it when you have these flamingos and others. They benefit of that. There are no fish. They go and feed on the amphipods and other things, algae.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Robert, you are muted.
Sorry, thank you. We have one question that's asking about comparing the effects on the pelagic versus benthic food web. Are there general trends?
Yeah, because of this increase in clarity, then the benthic system become much more important. And you can see it in many places that it's a lot of bacteria. Also, you get the sulfur bacteria in some of the saline systems that it's completely benthic. The system, because of the clarity is relatively high, and the nutrient levels in the water can often be very low because the benthic system takes over. So it becomes a benthic system. You see that in the hyposaline systems that several of the Russians have been working with in Crimea, and so that it's a benthic dominated system. So you get a shift from pelagic to benthic, and if they become very saline.
Like in oligotrophic lakes, yeah?
Yeah.
Similar to oligotrophic lakes, Erik.
And you can have very low nutrient concentration in the water. So nitrate can be extremely low in these systems.
There's a question from Ella Schmidt bringing up the obvious point that the human population will keep growing, so the demands on the agricultural side are expecting to increase. So it's a bit of a brave question. Have you come across any preliminary potential solutions to mitigate the high demand of agricultural irrigation?
No more meat eating.
Yeah, that you mentioned.
But we can still get the wine.
But, Erik, do you eat meat? Okay.
But that is the way forward. I think we cannot continue like this. It's or we have to make a sort of birth control to reduce the population in the future. So
it's also interesting to see that the soybean production among the crops is most water intense.
Yes.
Or among the, and that again, soybean production is very important for hog farming, these things, right?
Yeah.
And also for the Chinese market, it's enormous. The soybean production is huge everywhere now because of demand is increasing. So it's really bad. Yeah.
Another question by Nora: is there a salinity threshold for macrophyte communities? Very interesting question, actually.
Yes.
I have to say I don't know. to be honest. There are some, I've seen some papers on that you get a clear shift in community composition, of course, with increasing salinity, but I've not seen that they disappear completely, because you have the marine also. You have a lot of plants there, so I'll say I'm not, I cannot give an answer. It's
So that's something that would be another gap to address, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of gaps in this. I think it's mainly gaps, actually. The science has been very much descriptive and very little these big experiments of different kinds in the saline. And so this because, of course, most people have been working with freshwater, so that's a difference. So, not many experimental studies, for instance, in the bigger scale. There are a lot of, you could say, lab experiments where you change the salinity and see how it goes with different species and so. But there's the big scale experiments. There are not many, if there are any.
Erik, can we say that we don't really know mostly for the thresholds for many organisms as well? I mean, there are some for Daphnia, but depending on with the other stressors like eutrophication and so on, and plus the different kind of salt concentrations, there's a lot of missing, isn't it?
Yeah. And this way, you can say the ion composition is a very big thing. Not put it all together, because the thresholds are very different depending on the ion condition, no doubt.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to do here. So it's a good field. It's a young.
Good. So at least we picked a good topic for this webinar. Stella Berger is asking in which way you are making use of remote sensing methods in this new project, Saline Lakes.
This is a big part because we put around 1/5 of the resources to this now. So we use remote sensing, and you saw also already some figures there. I showed from this Lake METU, and you saw also the data of from some of the other lakes that had changed. And this means that we use it a lot to try to describe the changes over time. Yes. But of course, you cannot go back more than to 75, 80 or something like that. So you cannot describe the long-term perspective. But since the biggest changes have been in the last 20 years in Turkey, for instance, then we can use it a lot, and we will. It is clear priority. And
it's COVID-free also. COVID-free.
Until the satellite becomes infected.
Until we initiate the expedition, it's COVID-free, so it's good to do remote sensing.
This is a clear goal for us, and we work with it.
I take two last questions. One question I'm actually happy about, because I had a similar question. Mine is by Pablo Urita Cordero. He's asking about, let's say, mobility of organisms, or I translated a bit, I hope it's in his sense, about the tracking of organisms to track the environmental change. So obviously, we should not only be concerned about the extinction of species as the environment changes, but also that new species that are adapted to the new salinity can colonize these habitats. And he's asking, can you envision any scenario where this may be an important aspect to consider for certain species to avoid extinction? He means to bring actively organisms to places, to habitats that now are not fresh anymore, but saline, for example.
Yeah. This is, you can say, it's been discussed a lot if you can move organisms from one place to another where they had so they can have a refugium somewhere else. And this is, of course, possible. It's some ethical thing if you move things like this. And so I'll not come up with a clear answer on that, because it depends on the eyes watching again. But in principle, you can. And you can also say the more saline system you get, the better chance you have from, you can say, for getting if you lose them for one or another reason, that they can be colonizing these places again. And you have seen that in the soda pond in Hungary.
Yeah. I just read Pablo's question again. He's also asking the reverse, like, if certain habitats with, for example, endemic species are becoming too saline for current endemic fauna or flora, should we consider moving them? Yeah, it's not really specified, to other habitats where they can survive.
Yeah, but this can be discussed because you have in Turkey an enormous amount of endemic species, and this is of course because it was a big wetland during the glaciations. It was not covered by ice, but there was a lot of development during these periods. So you have a lot of endemic species, and you can discuss whether you should try to save them instead of now they dry out and they disappear. Mm-hmm. This is for discussion. But again, we say that you cannot just move things like this.
Yeah, interesting aspect. Brings us actually a bit into this sort of really managing the problems that we are causing by some really actions that we otherwise try to avoid, moving species around.
And you have a lot of species. That's the key thing in these areas where you're now getting much more salinization. That's where you have a lot of endemic species.
One aspect of this question maybe looked at is that how connectivity within the meta community landscape would allow some of the species to find a refuge to combat the salinization problem. I think this is also a very good field to do a mesocosm experiment on it. And I have seen a couple of papers published lately in freshwater biology that checking up on how the dispersal will sort of help in here for the nearest refuge. So this is also a very good field from the community ecology perspective as well.
Yeah, actually meta-community ecology in this field. And question both about connectivity and about sustainable population sizes that are remaining. Very interesting. Good, thanks. We really have a very interesting discussion. The last question from Behzad Mostair. How about the response of heterotrophic bacteria in these saline lakes? He's asking about consequences of on respiration, remineralization.
Yeah, but the bacteria takes over in these systems. You can say there is a microbial dominated systems there. And you also see that it become more heterotrophic because the oxygen concentration is often quite low in many of these saline systems. So it is a system that are depending on getting oxygen in from above, not by production from autotrophs. So this is very clearly seen in many of these systems that we have been dealing with in Konya and many other places in the world. That oxygen is low, and this means heterotrophic processes become a dominating one. And you also see many of these purple sulfur bacteria, for instance. You get completely red of bacteria. And this is again mostly in the benthic system. So it's a benthic dominated system where you have all these processes running. So it becomes heterotrophic more than autotrophic. It's very clear.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Erik. And thanks for staying with us for this very interesting discussion. It's past 3 o'clock. We will be closing this webinar. I thank everybody who has helped organizing it. In the background, especially Katerina and David, who did a lot of practical things. Thanks again, Erik, for taking time for us.
Yes.
Before closing, please, if you're interested in our next webinar, it will be about considering variability as biological important aspect of global change by Mary O'Connor. And this webinar will be in a week from now. And of course, if you want to listen to this or to the other webinars later on, you will find them on the AQUACOSM webpage. And with this, I wish everybody a nice afternoon. And those who join the World Cafe, we will open the link in 5 minutes from now.
Yeah. Thank you, Erik. Erik, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.